Today on Media and Society, we look at the coverage of men's issues in the media. Well, hello and welcome to Media and Society. I am your host, Naledi Muleo. Really good to have you with us this Sunday. This is, of course, the show where we look at the intersection between the media and society. And as usual, the show really would not be complete without your input. So give us a call on 011-714-0661 or 0662 or tweet us using the hashtag SABC Media Society. Well, here's our discussion for today. In South Africa, the month of June holds significance as both Youth Month and also International Pride Month. That's really some of the big themes that we've been celebrating over the past month. However, it is worth noting that June is also recognized as Men's Mental Health Month, and in some places it is dedicated to men's health in general. So today, even though we have already started July, we thought, here's an issue that we really ignored in June. So we addressed the lack of media attention towards the important issue, particularly of men's mental health, especially when the male suicide rate is reaching alarming levels, and factors even like femicide, like gender-based violence and the absence of fathers in households really highlight the urgent need to prioritize discussions around men's mental health. So joining us for this very important discussion, we are joined in studio by Mr. SABC, who is the co-founder of Empower Men. We're going to be speaking via Zoom to Tato Mbao, or TT Mbao, popularly known. He's a property mogul, a businessman, and also the founder of Amakya Wellness Network. Sikanda Kala, who is the founder of Cohesive Collaboration and a clinical psychologist, also joins us in studio. We'll also speak to Arthur Mokari, who's a digital editor of Men's Health, and we'll also be chatting to Shadra Kaseti, who is working in the space of training young people for the radio space. But let's start off with our guests in studio. Gentlemen, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
I think let's start off with yourself, Chaba, and talk about when you started Empower Men. There was a gap that you saw, right?
Yeah.
Without a doubt. A lot of us think, well, perhaps it started with the Valentine's Day joke around the men's conference, but it seems that around that time, men's conferences became a real conversation.
I guess those men's conferences. So what we did, we looked at where the voices were being expressed by men, but mostly it was about men. And men themselves were not finding, given the backdrop of men, GBV, backdrop of men are trash, and all those other hashtags, that men were in a corner, almost as spectators and not coming forth to make a contribution in changing the narrative and actually addressing the issues at hand. So we started Empower Men as a platform to create that space. It's a safe space, but it's a critical space in terms of the discussions and the depth that we go into.
Yeah. Titi, let me bring you in here as well. A good morning to you and welcome to Media and Society. We really appreciate your time. I think you obviously are one of those figures that is definitely a public figure where you've got a massive following in South Africa. What was it when you just realized the platform that you have that made you realize that work was important and a platform needed to be created for men to be able to express themselves as well? TT, are you there? Okay, got some sound issues there. We'll get back to him in a moment. Let's try and sort that out. But let me bring you in here, Sikanda, and talk about just what we're really looking at here. And I talked earlier about the suicide rate for men in South Africa. What are those numbers looking like at the moment?
Yeah, it's quite alarming. You know, one of the things that we see quite extensively in the mental health space is we look at specific mental disorders, depression that usually result in high suicide rates and what have you. And you'll find that women on average are diagnosed with more depression than men. However, the suicide rates, men's suicide rates are far exceeding women's successful suicide rates. And by successful suicide, what we mean is it's not a parasuicide in which there was an attempt, but it's actually resulting in the loss of life. And we find a multitude of reasons for that. So the reason why the depression rates seem much higher with women, but not so much with men, is often there's an underreporting of male depression. And there's a multitude of reasons for that. There's the stigma, there's how we conceptualize masculinity, where there's a suffering in silence sort of pattern. But then also at the same time, what we find is men bottle things up for prolonged periods of time to the extent that when it has become extremely overwhelming, the means that they use to ultimately attempt suicide is always far more lethal means that results in the loss of life.
Yeah.
So we see it as quite a multivariate issue.
So I'm quite interested in just picking a little bit at the point that you've made around, the diagnosis of depression in women, that we're seeing more numbers there. Is that because women are more in tune with their emotions? I mean, is that an educational thing where women are told what to look out for?
Yeah, I think it's partly a normalization of it's okay to suffer from some difficulties. And we still have a long way to go because a lot of women also still struggle with opening up. But I do think the way in which we frame masculinity, and particularly hegemonic masculinity, as the predominant form of masculinity that defines that a man needs to subscribe to this form of masculinity to be included in the social landscape. And if he does not subscribe to that form of masculinity, then he's excluded and ostracized. And I think that is why we see women being a little bit more comfortable in expressing some of their mental health difficulties, where with men, that fear of stigma, that lack of normalization, and that starts even at a young age. How we speak to the boy child about being attuned to their emotions translates to seeing things in later life that results with this pattern of suffering in silence.
You talk about that need to conform to a specific type of masculinity when you've got the high levels of unemployment that you do in this country, and the tough economic times that you're going through. I'm sure that's a very difficult thing for men to battle with on a daily basis.
It is indeed, especially when you consider the fact that men, for some reason, right or wrong, see themselves as providers. And providing means I need to make sure that I take care of others, and at the expense sometimes of themselves. So in taking care of others when the economy is where it's at, high unemployment, a lot of the discussions that you will find when you are having these conversations with men is the expectation starting from myself is still quite high despite the external environment. Then going to a family context, children and not wanting to be seen to be failing, the very people that you are supposed to look at. So within the context of family, it does present quite a big challenge, especially when in an identity yourself, you have identified as a male in that binary situation. It does become quite a challenge when circumstances don't allow you to fully express your masculinity, in this case financially so.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the role that women play, and I think we're going to get into that a little bit later on. But there's something to be said about the role that women play, in that when we're talking about some of those tough discussions around particularly finances and economic opportunity, women don't necessarily make that easier for men, do they?
Well, both parties don't make it easy for each other, isn't it? Others don't listen, others say I've got it covered, and then the other person, in this case women, don't actually know that in that silence, the man is actually suffering. So men don't open the door for women to be able to have those discussions with them. And when they do have the discussions, usually it's too late. And at that time, the expressions of frustration, helplessness is taking a form sometimes that could be quite violent in some cases. So women do have a role to play in creating an environment that allows for these conversations to happen without the men feeling that I'm now vulnerable, which might challenge how I see myself and how I portray myself, but just a conducive environment for deep discussions. Okay,
so let's talk a little bit about media content here. Are we seeing platforms that are creating those sort of discussions? And perhaps if we start from the beginning, so kind of maybe you go back to some of your days as a young man and some of the depictions that you saw on mainstream media that told you, okay, that's the kind of man I need to grow up to be. What did that look like?
Yeah, I think that's such a pertinent point, because ultimately the boy child always tries to emulate the sort of projective need to say, hey, this is how I subscribe to the predominant form of masculinity, and therefore I assert my place in society and I assert my identity. And yes, I do think that you look at the macho man, the Marlboro man, those sort of archetypes. Even if you look at other depictions, like James Bond, the spy that's somewhat emotionless, and how he deals with interpersonal relationships. And I think you see that that's slowly changing over time, but obviously it's shaped a generation at some point, and you see how that ultimately has led to individuals thinking there is some value in being quite stoic and hiding behind one's mask of a lack of emotions.
Yeah, well, let's bring our guest in. Titi, good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us. I think let's start off with you. When you started Amakia, talk to us about why you started it. And then maybe you can talk to me about your first images of what you saw on media that depicted the man that you wanted to be growing up? What was that archetype for you?
Good morning. So it's actually Amataima. The network is called
Amataima, okay,
Amataima.
all right.
Amataima is it's a Kasi slang for father or dad. And the reason why we started this movement was really to focus on the wellness of the men. We focus on the physical, mental, and financial wellness of men. When it comes to mental wellness, especially black men, that they never want to have the discussions around anxiety, around depression. And we're dealing with a different type of men these days. I look at the older generation of men like my dad and them who, used to be called a boy at work, and then he has to go back home and still be a man. Now that confuses any man in terms of how their mental state, gets compromised. One day you're a boy at work by someone who's actually younger than you, then you must come back and fulfill your role as a man at home. And that's why we have such a high case of GBV in some instances, because men want to portray their manhood physically and violently and verbally as well. So we speak to men about those things and trying to bridge that gap to say we want to create a society of good men who are actually aware and who are conscious about their actions. Hence why we've got a Telegram group, which is a safe space. We've got about 1,002 men in that group, from your CEOs to your blue collar workers, who are there not by a title, but because they are men who are seeking to find a safe space to chat to other men about what they're going through.
All right, Shadrach, I'm going to bring you in here because, Shadrach, you are a marketing executive with the Cape Audio School in Cape Town, really starting also to pump out skills for young content creators. When you hear young male content creators and the kind of stories they want to tell for their generation, what are those starting to look like? I think your mic is off there, Shadrach. No, okay, no, Shadrach's mic is off. Okay. All right, I'm going to come back to you then, Titi, as we try and sort out Shadrach's mic, and of course we'll bring in Arthur as well. I want to hear a little bit from you about what you make as an assessment right now of the stories that we tell around masculinity in present day media, right? When we talk so much about GBV, femicide, and then you've got the hashtag that Sachaba even talked about earlier, like men are trash. You certainly have a lot of work that is recognized needs to be done with men, but are we doing it in mainstream media?
Yeah, I think we're not doing enough of it when it comes to mainstream media. Men are having conversations amongst themselves in very small circles and in silos. And that's what we're trying to break. We're trying to break the curse. This whole hashtag that men are trash is something that we need to deliberately unpack as men and stop being defensive about it. So you are a man, you are in a WhatsApp group, and you can see the type of content that's being churned out. Why aren't you calling out those men in the group about that type of content? Why are you even still in that group? Why aren't you leaving and excusing yourself? We've got men that say, I'm not trash, I'm better than others, but you actually part of the same narrative. If you're not doing anything about it, you're just going to be a bystander. You look at all these GBV walks and GBV, activations, you don't see enough men. And yet the biggest perpetrators of GBVF are men. So we are actually challenging men. We're changing the narrative. We are even going as far as educating men about menstruation, because there's this myth or misconception that it's a woman's job or a mother's job to talk to the girl child about menstruation. It actually isn't. The girl child must be able to speak to both parents about that.
Yeah. Arthur, let me bring you in here. You're with Men's Health, and I think a lot of the time when we think about Men's Health, we think of, big muscular men on the covers of the magazine, and that as a representation of, the kind of men that we say, well, this is the guy you become. How do you tackle issues around men's mental health and how they view themselves and the role they play in society?
Hi, guys. So this year we have dedicated the entire year into your fittest year ever. And what does that mean is we look at your mental well-being, emotional, financial, physical, all of that, so that we unpack all of those all of those topics of what men go through in those spheres. And then after that, we use those to just enlighten and just steer away, not just steer away from looking good in the cover, but just those are the things that men face. So we look at things like financial well-being. Where are they financially? Mental well-being, addressing issues that they go through, like anxiety, depression, and things like that. So we try to look at all spheres, all aspects that men go through, and then unpack it in all our digital platforms, or print, even in print as well, to try to unpack and just like have conversations of what do men go through besides looking good.
Okay, yeah, listen, we're going to continue this discussion. We're not done. Let's take a short break, though. When we come back, we'll take calls as well. What do you make about how the media covers the issues of men's mental health? And we're asking the guys and the ladies to call in. What content would you like to see to prepare perhaps your son, your young man, for the world that he's walking into? Give us a call on 011-714-0661. We're back in a moment. Welcome back. You're still watching Media and Society. Well, despite a growing awareness about mental health, men continue to face unique challenges when it comes to seeking help, but also expressing their emotions. Societal expectations of masculinity often dictate that men should be strong, self-reliant, and unaffected by emotional struggles. And of course, these stereotypes are even perpetuated in media spaces, either by male stories being blatantly ignored or in ways that portray men in the media as horrible people that contribute only evil to our society. So this morning we're talking about how the media can play a role in helping men understand their mental health and accessing opportunities for them as well to better themselves. Give us a call as well. We're really keen to hear from you. What is the media content that you'd like to see created for your boys? Give us a call on 011-714-0661 or 0662. We continue this discussion in studio with Mr. Sechaba Mutsielwa, who is the co-founder of Empower Men, and of course we continue as well with TT Mba, property mogul, businessman and founder of Amataima Wellness Network. Sekanda Kala is the founder of Cohesive Collaboration and also a clinical psychologist. Arthur Mokari is on Zoom. He's a digital editor of Men's Health, and Shadrach Seti, marketing executive for the Cape Audio College, that's upskilling young content creators that are going into the radio space. Sekanda, let's come to you, right? What should the right kind of media content for men look like? So I'm saying, what is the stuff that we start to exclude? We do this very well in South Africa of portraying our men, particularly in the townships, as people that are in the shebeen. We do that a lot. People that perhaps aren't faithful to their wives. How should we be portraying them?
Interestingly enough, I would not exclude any portrayal, because I do think those are the lived real experiences that are occurring in specific spaces. They may be microcosms of a larger issue. So I don't think the exclusion is the way to go. I think it's more including the full variance of it. So the positive aspects as well as the negative aspects. We need to create more exposure on what the difficulties are, while simultaneously also showing what one could aspire towards or how one could go about improving their lives. There needs to be that dichotomy, because I think what's been happening a lot in society lately is we've been villainizing masculinity in different ways, intentionally, unintentionally at times as well. And I think if you villainize masculinity, what ends up happening is it creates this ripple effect of individuals feeling like a lack of belonging in their identity. So you find that certain things like competence, certain things of areas of attributes that are actually quite positive actually go away as well and get villainized in the same moment. So I think we need to find how we integrate more nuance, where we create that perception that yes, there are dichotomies, there are extremes, but there's also middle ground. And in that middle ground, there's a lot of lost subtleties that are so important to express, because in expressing that, we can identify with it, resonate with it, and ultimately that can motivate us to say, I want to emulate some of these positive attributes while still going through my difficulties.
Can I ask you maybe just to explain what is sort of the traits of masculinity that we have villainized? Because once we're able to deal with that, we're able to say, okay, this is what society is doing to men.
So I think if you look at discussions about the gender pay gap and what have you, and all of those valid merits to, maybe difficulties of equality of opportunity, which are valid conversations to be having, but also at the same time, it creates a space in which we identify specific forms of competence as patriarchal power differentials that also come into the landscape and ultimately create barriers for others. And I think we live in a world now where it's almost like a zero-sum game, where if one person's gaining, another person's losing, and I think that sort of mindset creates the sort of perpetrator-victim dichotomy. And I think that's when you do not create allies, but you create enemies. So I think it's important for us to just step back a little bit and say, okay, fine, these are multivariate issues. There's many reasons for them. How do we unpack some some of the reasons rather than villainize the individual.
Yeah.
So how do I not categorize you as a man that is part of a patriarchal system that is creating this tyrannical force that is impacting women and other marginalized groups, perhaps, but rather to say what is wrong with the systemic and structural aspects in society, that we can break down those aspects without breaking down the individual.
Yeah,
I think that's
I like that point that you've made, though, around us needing to create allies instead of enemies, and that even when you look at perhaps the gender pay gap, you're already starting to see this tug of war that's taking place. And I like to make the examples, Chaba, quite often that, you know, perhaps my generation, those were, you know, that were educated in the late 90s to the early 2000s, we had Destiny's Child telling us that we were independent and we were, you know, survivors, and these women that didn't need men. Unfortunately, though, we grow up into a society where we are going to be with men. And I think that there's something to be said about whether or not, even in our own homes, we have created that sort of you know, relationship where we're enemies of each other because the women are independent. The men perhaps are going through a difficult time because more opportunities seemingly are being given to women in some areas because, you know, that's where the women need to be encouraged.
Yeah, I think both men and women need to occupy all spaces in society. But those spaces sometimes are not ready to receive either the men or the women. An example was made earlier around what conversations as a dad do I have with my daughter? Or do we limit those conversations to the extent then that I don't understand emotionally how my daughter will be growing? When it comes to issues, for example, like the pay gap and the pressures and how women have closed the gap, sometimes even passing their partners in that particular space, we almost need to educate people how to deal with, call it new money. If I was to use an analogy, because it can become a little bit challenging because suddenly you can swipe. Suddenly you can be the one that tells everybody, I paid the school fees as a woman for my children. You know, Michelle Botta makes that example to say then your money will use it to buy maybe a bit of lunch, but mine pays for the big things. And all those conversations just make it so much difficult to be able to become allies, not enemies, because now suddenly you are competing with each other, not collaborating. And competition can lead to to very complex situations.
Shadrach, I'm going to try again with you now, and you're working with young people that are content creators going into the radio space. I mean, what are you hearing from young men particularly, those that are just starting their media career, about the content they want to create for men? What does that look like?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
All good, yes. Go ahead.
Awesome. Yes. So on the conversation of media, so what I've noticed, so if we look about, let's say, traditional media, a lot, it was like what you see on television. It was almost like people were kind of, you know, the media houses were in control of what people had access to. But now with social media, a lot of young people get to choose exactly what content they're going to interact with. So that's kind of, it's very difficult now from a media aspect of how do we, you know, influence people positively? Because I can literally, you know, I can scroll down, I can delete, I can choose exactly what I want to see as opposed to, you know, just being told. And that's what's the beauty about, you know, the modern digital age right now.
But here's the thing, and even while you've got young men that have choice about the content that they consume, Shadrach, my concern is the content that they're consuming even online might not be very useful for them. I think of the likes of hip-hop artists that are content creators and, you know, have pages that use very derogatory language or, and not just derogatory towards women, but also about making other men that don't have what they have feel bad. I mean, where's the positive role modeling even in the media spaces that they are going to?
Yes, so that's a very interesting point and very on the mark. So there is positive media out there, but now it's how do you entice these young people to access the positive media? And we're also living at a time of, you know, people, it's all about energy. So it's what resonates, what type of energy are you bringing? And does it resonate with how I'm feeling right now? For, like, if we look at music, like a lot of people, like traditionally, people that could sing very well, are not as popular as those people that are just, singing in their normal voices, but they're bringing a particular energy that resonates with young people. So I think maybe the approach would be, is the energy that, we are portraying, does it match what young people are feeling? And you can't really sort of categorize people's feelings because everybody's going through, a lot, and there's a variety of influences that are evoking particular emotions. So
Yeah.
you are 100% correct, but those particular artists, they just, people want what's relatable.
Yeah.
And that's where the difficulty is how do you make it relatable but make it positive as
Yeah,
well? And that's
and
where the media and people are going to struggle.
yeah, then here's the reality is these are the men of the future, right? So these are the men that are going to be leading the country 10, 20, 30 years from now, and we still haven't figured out how to speak to this generation that is being told you don't have a Cadillac, so you're not good enough. Which is a tough thing. But Arthur, I want to bring this in here. I mean, how do you try and then speak to the younger ones? I think the older guys have their perception of what masculinity looked like. And I imagine that if you'd looked at men's health issues 10 years ago, they look different to what they do right now. Or the market certainly is different. How is it changing?
So this is where we come in. We try to, especially in the digital platforms, because the age range is kind of different from the print platform. So that's when we unpack the mental health. We talk about like why is it important for Black men, most importantly, to speak about mental health issues. We speak to psychologists, anyone that is in that field. We unpack the conversation, trying to understand why do men not talk about mental health issues or things that they're going through.
Yeah.
And also we're trying to like minimize the stereotype. We're not fully there yet, but like minimize it and actually allow men to speak about things that they're going through.
Yes.
And that's when, we push that narrative so vastly so that our people, because like I said, our audience digitally is very young. And that's where we want to reach that audience and make sure that they speak about things that they're feeling or whatever that they may be going through at that specific time.
I wonder,
or period.
I'm trying to imagine what that sounds like because we don't see it a lot. You don't see a lot of men talking about their feelings. Titi, what does that sound like? So when you're sitting with Amataima and you guys are saying, let's talk about feelings. What does that sound? What does that look like? What does that sound like?
So what we've done as the Amatama Wellness Network is really curate wellness events for men to be able to be exposed to things that are traditionally not supposed to be consumed by men. So, for example, 2 weeks ago, we hosted about 180 men across different ages, men who are single, married, divorced, and widowed. We hosted a pamper day for them. Now, imagine 170 men being pampered. It was very surreal for most of them to be pampered in terms of doing their nails, doing their skin, because there's this perception that men are not supposed to do their nails. And we're trying to show them that you need to groom yourself. And it's also an opportunity to engage with the young men to say, yeah, the old men that have gone through what you're probably going through now, speak to them. They will be able to advise you. Of course, times are different. We're living in different ages, but the principles are exactly the same. You want to build a society of good men, a society of men that stand firmly against GBVF, and a society of men that will always protect women and their kids. And through these curated events, we are able to unpack issues like finances. Men don't like to talk about money. So we get financial experts and professionals to come and talk to them about the importance of money and financial literacy.
Yeah, you're still not letting me be a fly on the wall here, man. And this is essentially what I'm digging for from you, right? So you're sitting, and I'm gonna give you an example, Titi. You were the 24-year-old man who, has finished varsity, has been looking for work for 4 years, and really is frustrated, is starting to feel like he's simply not equipped for this world. And the 22-year-old girls that are around him just don't look at him because he doesn't have what the 35-year-old dude has, which is the fancy. I mean, these are the realities of what these young men are dealing with. How do you start a conversation with that young man, yourself, TT, to say, you've got this, you're okay?
So, of course, this is where we come in as the older and wiser generation to say, Uti, Autiami, you're not alone in this, and that's why we've got this Telegram group actually, which gives other men an opportunity to be exposed in terms of job opportunities and just in general how to accept certain things in life. The fact that you can go for a job interview and not actually get the job, rejection is part of life. But when you get exposed to the different kind of men in that group, you're actually, exposed to what is out there. And we do have these conversations with these young men who are sometimes even in jail. We deal with a lot of men who are in prison who have said that I've made a mistake. I was young. I didn't know what I was doing. And I'm actually, sorry for what I've done, but how do I get out of that? Because coming out of prison, there's judgment by society.
Yeah.
I struggle to get a job because there's a stigma that I'm an ex-con. And we have those conversations with these men, and we bring in professionals where we obviously cannot offer help beyond that.
Yeah, no, great one. I'm going to take some calls as well. Give us a call on 011-714-0661. What is the content that you'd like to see created by mainstream media to help your husband, your son, really cope in a world that is increasingly difficult for South African men? Give us a call, 011-714-0661. I talked a little bit about, what that conversation sounds like when we're talking to a young man, Sikanda. I'm imagining that when we're talking to an older man, it's actually a lot more difficult because you're talking to somebody who's not as receptive to what TT is talking about, well, we're going to pamper you and help you relax. What does that sound like?
Yeah, I completely agree that you'll find a bit more rigidity there and stubbornness. Specifically just with the historical baggage of I've always been this way, so I'm not receptive to change. Yeah. But interestingly enough, with older men, what you also find is they've lived through the pros and the cons of some of these dynamics. You touched on the earlier point of what do you say to a young man that's maybe in his early 20s and he doesn't have the stuff that a man in his mid-30s may have, the house, the car, the what have you. And you find that with older men, they've had those things and they've developed a bit more self-awareness to actually say, hey, you know what? These pros come with some cons. And I think that's what we also need to do, create some self-awareness attunement to what are the cons of things. Because things look amazing on social media, they look amazing in the club, they look amazing, in that whole production. But there's the lived experience beyond that. There's the lived experience beyond the intoxication. There's the lived experience beyond the hedonistic impulses. And that lived experience creates a little bit of a gap where you can reach out and say, what are you actually feeling? There's something a bit more there. Let's tap into that. And there's a bit more receptiveness because there's the awareness that I felt pain in some particular way. And maybe I'm numbing that pain with all of these distractions.
What I'm enjoying about what you're saying, Sikanda, is that essentially what we're hearing now for the man who's watching at home, whether young or older, is that regardless of how far gone you think you are, there's always opportunity for someone like a psychologist to come in and step in and say, there's the gap. We can help you right there. There is no, man that's too broken, which I think is important for us to highlight. Let's take call 011-714-0661. Tabo's on the line in Soweto. Tabo, good morning.
Yeah, man, I like the topic, Naledi. But to tell the truth, it's a very disturbing issue when it comes to us as Majida. And media doesn't make it easy for us.
What would you like to see? I mean, give us suggestions, Thabo. What is it that you'd like to see more on the media that would make you feel like, okay, the media does care about the state of South African men?
I'll make an example, Naledi. I think sometimes in 2020 there was a court case, it was challenging this issue. I think Section 10, birth and death registration. And the High Court, yes, as a man or as a father, unmarried father, you are able to use a fair name. But that issue, however, in media.
Okay.
Those are the things that we like to see, we like to hear about on radios, to see it in TV, so that we know, okay, what is bad, what is bad, which is legal and what is illegal. But most of the things, you only get to know what you are not supposed to do or what you like, I don't know if we're one taller.
No, I understand you completely, Thabo, and you've made a very good point. So essentially, Thabo's talked about how, particularly where it comes with how men relate with their children, especially if they're not perhaps married to the mothers of those children. A lot of the time, men are educated about things that they cannot do, what's illegal, but they're not talking about the opportunities that they have to be great and present, rightful fathers, and to even give their children their names, for instance. An interesting point. So Thabo asking for more educational content for men in that sense. Siabulela in the Eastern Cape. Siabulela, good morning. Thanks for calling in.
Hi, ma'am. How are you?
I'm well, sir. How are you?
Yeah, no, I'm good, man. It's quite a very interesting point you guys are coming up with today, because you know what? You never know what our younger men are facing out there, you know. And then you find that now they've got so much pressure. They take choices perhaps of attempting suicide, drugs, and those kind of things, you know. So it's up to us as the older generation to show the guys that, you know what, yes, you do make mistake, but how do you rise up from a life-changing situation? You know, I'm blind now due to an attempted suicide way back when I was just outside high school. So, you know, it's quite important to go back now to understand what our younger generation are dealing with in order to prevent them from making choices that they might regret in life, number one. Number two, how do they pick up the pieces after a life-changing situation is quite also key as well. So that's what I wanted to actually talk about, because I'm also a motivational speaker to actually eliminate those kind of things as well.
Tell me this, because you say that you yourself are blind as a result of an attempted suicide when you were very, very young. So when you speak to younger men and you say that you do mentor them, what are the biggest issues that they come to you about? The biggest things that really sit at the top of their minds that they just simply cannot work out?
The issue is this: what men don't cry. That's the number one issue that people have to deal with. You have to let out your emotion and not bottle them aside. That's the biggest issue. Having a place to actually talk to, or people to talk to, and not bottle things. That I see as the biggest issue, because it all starts in the mind as well.
Okay. Yeah, Siabulela, thank you so much for calling in, and continue the great work that you're doing as well to support younger men. Siabulela in the Eastern Cape, taking more calls on 011-714-0661. Shadrach, I want to bring you in here because we haven't spoken to you a lot today, and I think that there's a lot that we can learn from you about what the young men you interact with really want to be doing, right? The content that they are creating when they start going into media spaces. I mean, are they doing this sort of bravado, I'm a cool hip guy, or are we starting to see, and I'm hoping for this, you know, a more in touch man? I mean, we're hearing a lot about how this new generation of workers that's coming into the workforce wanting to work for responsible workplaces that are even sustainable and environmentally responsible, right? Are we seeing those young men wanting to have, you know, the tough conversations, the more gentle, responsible conversations?
Yes, so the beauty now is, I think young people are allowed to really express themselves, and a lot of are just expressing what they're feeling. So if it's a happy feeling, then the content they produce is gonna be happy. If it's if it's a traumatic experience, then the content will also reflect trauma. So a lot of people, young people, it's just a lot about just expressing what that immediate feeling is, and we actually do need for whether it's negative and positive, because that's how society, I guess, gets to learn how people are feeling, as opposed to it doesn't make sense for young people to just mask and completely just have the positive aspects. I think we need to have access to all sorts of emotions, and that's what's currently happening. People are just expressing how they're feeling right now.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting. So I think as time develops, then people will now start kind of maybe adjusting a little bit to be like, okay, maybe I'm sharing a bit too much, and then they'll start maybe sticking to the positive bit.
Okay, I need to go to a break, Arthur, but I need to come to you and say, okay, what's the perfect archetype here? Because Shadrach has expressed this younger man who's now able to express his emotions. How do you describe the men's health man who is emotionally responsible, psychologically aware, physically fit, as you say, because it's so important, and I can promise it's important to all of us as well.
Sorry, I was on mute there.
Yeah.
I think it's basically, there isn't a perfect archetype, but it's just like, I feel like everyone is a work in progress. You just need to understand where your weaknesses are and your strong points are, and using that to balance life. Because life is very intense. Like anything can be thrown at you at any goal. So you just need to find balance and being able to be in tune with your emotions, physically, mentally, and all of that, so that you are able to take on or tackle life as it throws stones at you in whatever way that may come. I think that's my personal belief.
I love that. Okay, so we're going to take a short break. When we come back, I really think with our 5 guests, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can plug into all the work that they are doing, so that at the end of the show, you've got tools. You don't still feel like there's no way for you to go as a South African man when you just need a little bit of help, all right? Stay with us. We're back in a moment. Welcome back. We continue our conversation around men's mental health and how the media is helping or perhaps not helping men deal with some of the tough stuff that they deal with on a daily basis. So taking your calls on 011-714-0661 or 0662. Really keen to hear your thoughts and perhaps opportunities that you've seen, platforms that are being created in your community for men to get on there and share their experiences, whether it be your local radio station. Call in and let us know if they're really doing a good job. 011-714-0661. Okay, I think let's get into where we go, empower men, what it looks like when empowerment gets together, and why we should come through.
Yeah, so let's start with the easy part, www.empowermen.co.za. A lot of the content sits there. So Empowermen is a platform that allows conversations to happen around. We've got like 9 themes: men and identity, men and family, men and substance abuse, men and violence, men and the LGBTQ plus community. So there's a couple of key themes that when you go onto the platform, you'll be able to engage the content. We hold summits. The one we held now in April, 1,700 men came to the summit, and we're able then to express the different views. And this is where you actually find that there are certain small nuances that you miss. For example, we talk about men being vulnerable. And men will tell you, if I'm vulnerable, I'm showing a weakness, which other men and other people in society can take advantage of. Let's deconstruct what we mean when saying men should be vulnerable. Perhaps we're just more talking about I should access the full spectrum of my emotions and express it correctly in the right context. So financially, if you want to express your financial situation, do you have to put it to everybody, or do you have a close group of friends, other men perhaps, that you can speak to freely, so that you don't expose yourself, and in the end, your vulnerability becomes a source of further pain, simply because you have shown in a wrong platform, wrong context, an element that as a man may actually just leave you in a worse place. Yeah. So empowerment allows a lot of those to come through workshops, inspirational talks, like we said earlier, of somebody who's a motivational speaker, because there are so many nuances that you can never fully say this is the correct way to look at. In that summit, somebody said even the language of communication was a challenge, because sometimes we don't allow our own languages to truly go deep into where we can access the true self of who we are.
I like that. Thank you so much. Okay, Sikanda, the services that you offer for men, I think let's talk about that. And then as you answer that, talk to me about what happens, what's on the other side if you don't just take care of that, take care of your emotions, your mental health, because it's important. What's on the other side if you don't do that?
Yeah, so I think 2 parts to that. So, just like my fellow guest was talking about us collaborating rather than, being enemies. So we should emulate being an ally. For us, as our organization, we're reached at www.cohesivecollaboration.com. And what we're trying to ultimately do there is collaborate with every single individual to say, how do we play a role on a micro level, on a meso level, and on a macro level? Because it starts at the individual level, but then also that informs broader structures, the community, and that informs the society. And I think also vice versa, the society informs the community, and the community informs the individual. So I think we need to be careful there. And one interesting point that I also just want to touch on is we've been trying to unpack what is the perfect archetype. this entire morning.
We've been doing that.
Yes, and I would actually say that the perfect archetype is an honest, imperfect archetype. Because that's what we are, imperfect at the end of the day. But we're not having those honest conversations of the imperfections.
Yeah.
So I think it's so important to say, the story of the hero is not someone who's just been a hero their whole life. The story of the hero is a redemptive story. You go through your trials, your tribulations, you go through your difficulties, you play a role in the landscape that's untoward at times, but you learn from it. You unlearn and relearn, and that is what creates the hero in the end. And I would say that's the archetype.
It's a great one. TT, Amatama, how we plug into the work that you're doing?
So Amatama, we are on Facebook as well as on Instagram. And if you click on the link in our bio, you can actually get access to the Telegram group that I was talking about, where we have about 1,002 men. It's a safe space. And we also curate a lot of events, workshops and summits where we talk about physical, mental, and financial wellness. And we're actually going to now go deeper and have summits that are specific. So we're going to have summits for single men. We're going to have summits for married men, divorced men, widowed men. We want to talk to those widowed men just to unpack what it's like to go through the loss of pain and how do you come back from that. A divorced man's pain is very different from a married man's pain, is very different from a single man's pain. So we've got to unpack it as we go and learn as we go. That's the most important thing. And I like what my brother said. It's about the honest imperfections and realizing our weaknesses and turning them into strengths.
I love that. Thank you so much. Okay, Arthur, before we wrap things up, from you, give us the platform where we can go to look at some of the work that you're doing, particularly around this theme from a digital point of view.
Okay, so we have a website at menshealth.co.za, www.mh.co.za. So we also have a men's health, mental health series that we're running throughout the year. We've collaborated with a emotional intelligence platform where we talk about mental health, we unpack it from the initiation and what men are going through to physiological needs, all of those. So it's on YouTube, it's under Men's Health South Africa. And also on our social platforms, it's Men's Health ZA on all platforms. It's TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Okay, all right, great. Shadrach, for you, I know that you have an online radio station where you've got young men that are going and beginning their careers, or able to hear their voices and really what they want to be talking about, the kind of stories they want to tell. How do we get to that?
So simply capeaudiocollege.com. When you get there, the stream is up there, and that's where a lot of young people are just starting off, and that's where you can find it. So just capeaudio.com, capeaudiocollege.com to be exact.
All right, go there, and you can check out the kind of content that young people want to be creating for themselves as well as they start out. I've got a question for all of you before we wrap up. A lot of the time, and I'm going to ask you to do it all in maybe 2 words, only 2 words. A lot of the time when we talk about women's issues, we talk about the role that men need to be playing. Let's talk about the role that women need to be playing to help men as well. What is it that you'd like to see more from South African women? 2 words.
Listen and be empathetic.
Interesting enough. Collaborate and I would say empathy.
Yeah. Shadrach?
I was actually going to use the word collaborate there, just as he says. So, top of my head, I would say is just respect and openness. Yeah.
Okay, Arthur?
For me, it's listen and support.
Okay, Titi, you get the last bite. 2 words for South African ladies.
Acknowledge us and love us.
Okay, we got it. Gentlemen, it's been such a pleasure having you in studio with us and having you on Zoom. Shadrach, Arthur, TT, Mr. Kala, as well as Chaba. An absolute pleasure. We look forward to spending time with you again next week, Sunday, here on Media and Society. But keep interacting with us on this all-important topic on SABC News. #SABC News. Have yourselves a great Sunday.